All right.
I gotta make sure mine's on mute, but I can't until you.
All right. We are live. Welcome again to another.
It's not Monday.
It's not. No, it's round table with all of our knights for a round table live discussion. How's everybody doing tonight? Everybody batting down the hatches for storm that's coming in.
I don't know if we're going to get the storm here.
I know we're supposed to get snow. Fair, I think it's like 20 centimeters or so. Up to. So we'll see whether that appears or not.
I seen somebody posted it was between 1 and 78 inches, maybe, possibly.
Somewhere within that range.
Yeah,
somewhere within that range. All right. Well, I know we got Darren from Thorhaven. He's supposed to be showing up. He's still in transit, so he'll be a few minutes late to catch up with us. I had some questions that I figured we could hit on for topics. Let's see. What, if anything, do you guys do for late fall prepping for winter?
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh boy. Late fall
I
prepping.
know, it's a big one.
The comedic answer is try to get as much as possible done before it either freezes or we get too much snow to do anything. I guess the better answer, it's usually that time when things start to shift, right? Because you've finished garden season, you may have a little bit of cleanup to do. If you get to it, you get to it. If you don't, you don't. There's always those late season things like planting garlic. I think that's a big one. That's a big one because that definitely, if you miss the window, you missed the window, right? You're frozen, and that's kind of it. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to probably say it's the final butchering of poultry and livestock to bring numbers down. Because really, by late fall, I joke about trying to squeeze in projects, but you're not getting a lot of projects done usually. We're usually lucky if we get one or two done before it actually comes. So it's kind of that's the yearly thing, bring the numbers back down.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
For me, it's mostly hunting season. I tend to hunt a lot. I love being in the woods, especially in the fall. I mean, the colors are wonderful, and you can just smell like you're in the nature. It smells so good. Preparing for winter, like Chris said, I mean, you're trying to get as much as possible done before everything freezes out. But beside taking care of the animals, I mean, the garden is pretty much done by then. We still had like a couple of things here and there. I still have some carrots on the ground. I'm gonna pick them up in the spring. It's trying to get the soil ready for the following year. Put fertilizer if you can. Like I have some manure, but I forgot to put the rabbit manure. But I still had some chicken poop that I was able to put a little bit, especially around like the trees. I had a couple of apple trees. I mean, even if you put not a decomposed poop, it's fine. I mean, you're not gonna kill anything around, and you're not gonna poison yourself. So was also, like I said, apples. There's so many apple trees around here, wild apple trees. So we spend most of our nights, my son and I, going out hunting grouse, gathering apples. Making sure the property's clean because you don't want to open the driveway with a big snowblower and having a bunch of toys from the kids laying around. And try to put some shield protection on top of our little bushes so they don't get crushed by the snow, I guess.
I find it weird though because I don't have a lot of the gardening side on my end. Angie usually takes care of that. So for me, it's always just like cutting firewood, making sure everything's kind of put away. But it feels like I've been constantly building since I moved up here. So it seems like there's never any getting ready for winter. It's just how many projects can I finish before I can't go anymore.
Well, and you certainly have been building a lot.
Yeah, I know we just finished the trusses today or yesterday, and we strapped the roof and got it ready. So we're gonna start framing off inside and start working there pretty soon too. Just go, go, go.
At least there's eventually a finish line. Eventually.
Yeah, it'll be nice eventually. Eventually, we're starting to see it now, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Here's another one for us. If you ever have any injuries on the homestead, how do you typically go about taking care of them? And if so, what would you suggest to somebody for like a med kit on site?
Oh boy. Well, I guess it depends on the injury. I probably would say, I'm going to knock on wood, that we've been pretty fortunate. Everything's been minor, like cuts, scrapes, bruises, maybe splinters, that kind of thing. So there hasn't been any big things for the most part. Probably the biggest one I can think of sort of recently was when Stephanie got stepped on by the horse. That was about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was. And it was not the horse's fault. It happened while doing her feet. And that was kind of a big thing. But fortunately, it didn't break skin or anything like that. So there was only so much you could do. So I guess it's good to have the training that you could do something like, first aid, that kind of thing. I would say bare bones. Hello, Darren.
How's it going, guys? Sorry I'm late.
Not bad.
Was down in the city and got held up in a meeting. So
That's fair.
Whatever.
All right.
Yeah. Probably a real basic advice would be, if nothing else, at least have a first aid kit of some kind. That's probably a starting point, and probably something everybody should have.
Yeah. I mean, a good one I find would be, having burn stuff in there, as well as like, I'd say a basic med class would be, or like a field medic class would be great for anybody who's moving off grid or out into doing a homestead. Knowing how to do a splint, knowing how to do a tourniquet, simple things like that, knowing when to do, which one and what kind of triage to do. I think that would be important. That's something I would recommend to anybody who's coming out to live off, away from the city.
Yeah.
I know with Remy, it should be easy if he ever, gets out here with us. So,
well, I work in a hospital, so I with the job I have, I don't need to stay on top of things with first aid stuff. But I was a firefighter back in the days, so I had to take a first aid course, and then I was very involved with kids. I was coaching soccer for a long time, so I kind of try to stay up to date. So at least if something happened, that I knew what to do. As for if I was ever having a big injury on the homestead itself, not really. Like Chris said, a couple of scratches and bruises, but nothing major. But I did cut myself very bad when I was trying to cut open my moose last fall. By the time my parents got their kill, it was getting just before it got dark. And by the time we got there, it was actually dark. And we didn't have any lamps except for cell phones. We're trying to light up what we're doing. And my dad is 63 years old, so he's never opened a moose. Like I had to be the one to do it. So I was trying. He was gone to get the ropes and all the stuff to get the moose out of the woods, and I was trying to open him up. and I had my hand, and for some reason, I don't know, like I was trying to be careful not to cut myself with a knife, but the knife was so sharp that I just went through and cut myself right on the finger. Um, I mean, I can still see it. There's still like a little bump, I guess, on my finger. It started bleeding bad, and I was stuck in the middle of the woods. So first thought I had was I have to stop the bleeding, and then I'll have to try to find a way to clean it, and then I have to finish the move. So I have to figure out a way to get that done. But it turned out I wasn't able to continue. I was just I picked a like an old shirt we had in the back of the Jeep, and we
Yeah.
took some pieces of it and just put it on my finger as tight as I could until the bleeding stopped. It hurt like hell, but it had to be done. So from that point, it was just okay. I'll be the light guy. I'll just hold on to the phone and tell you step by step what to do. It had to be done, and there was no way I could put my hand back in the moose blood. It's always you it's hard to be prepared. We always say we have to be prepared for because anything can happen really, but when things happen, you leave on a rush. There's always that adrenaline that picks you up. You forget all the stuff. You get there and it's too late. Well, at least I was, um, I don't want to brag by saying I was smart, but I was smart enough to grab something and stop the bleeding. And from there, when I got back at the trailer later that night, I put some band aid and some good tape, and it was good the next morning at least.
So, Darren, the question was like, for injuries on the homestead, what would you
Yeah.
typically do, and what would you recommend to somebody who's moving out onto a homestead?
First two things I'd recommend is courses. Do your CPR course, refresh it all the time, and do another one called Stop the Bleed. So it, I think, was designed for basically gunshots, but it will teach you how to stop bleeding. So on a homestead, there's chances of, chainsaw injuries, axe injuries. Say you fall off a ladder and land on a branch that you just cut and you're impaled by a branch. Getting cut on electrical wire, like fencing wire, anything like that. There's so many things around a homestead that can impact you, puncture you, cut you. It's crazy. So definitely do those two courses. And then I have stocks of basically a basic first aid kit and then what I call the trauma kit. So in the basic first aid kit, I keep, stuff for burns, cuts, scratches, alcohol swabs, that kind of stuff. In the trauma kit, I keep tons of gauze, hemostatic agents, and tourniquets. So what I'd suggest for everybody is get the training so you know how to use those, what order to use those in, so that you're able to utilize it. For most cuts, punctures, that kind of stuff, basic gauze and pressure will stop most bleeding. If you're getting into something heavier with an artery, that kind of stuff, then possibly you might go to a hemostatic agent or a tourniquet. However, a lot of the time, pressure and gauze will still work on those. But to have it on hand and have it handy is such a big relief, especially on a homestead where, some of us could be an hour away from help or further. So it makes a difference in that regard.
And not just that, but you also, I think, need to know when to use certain things and when not to.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you just immediately jump to a tourniquet, you're probably going way past what you need to do in
Bingo,
most situations.
exactly. Yeah, that hemostatic agent, you might cause more damage than the original injury. So you want to make sure you have training to be able to know when to use which.
Especially like you were saying, if you, for instance, fall on a branch that you were cutting and it impales your leg, you could be close to that artery, and it could be the only thing blocking that artery from like actually bleeding you out. So,
Exactly. Yep.
in certain situations, you might not want to pull that branch out. You might want to just cut it off.
No,
and
never
get
pull
yourself
anything
to-
out.
Right?
Yeah. Never pull
It's
anything
good to
out.
know.
And the old, I want to say old wives' tale about using female hygiene things for cuts and scrapes and that, don't. Get actual
Yeah.
gauze, get proper medical stuff. Don't dig into your wife's or your girlfriend's stuff for a first aid kit. It's not designed for that. Don't use it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Switching topics a little bit. I know we hit bug season right after all this cold weather goes away, and it gets pretty thick up here. What would you suggest for the best course of action to like either bug control or how do you deal with it?
Oh boy. I guess that depends on what insect it is. It's like black flies, for example. It's a relatively short season. It's annoying when it's there, when that season's in play, but it's kind of a quick and it's over, as opposed to like mosquitoes, for example, which that's drawn out over months. Definitely, the best thing there is don't leave anything that collects water somewhere that you're just going to forget about it. Like obviously, like if you've got stock tanks and stuff, you're cleaning them. You still may get mosquitoes hatch out in them, but you're probably cleaning them, or they're getting drank down by the animals frequently enough that it never sits long enough to support mosquitoes. But an old bucket behind the barn or something doesn't take much water, and you can have a lot of mosquitoes produced there. And they can make it. They're not so bad in the daytime, but kind of when you get to the evening, they can make it kind of not pleasant. Fortunately, too, we're lucky that we don't have like the yellow fever and malaria that we used to have in the part of North America that we live in. Where it went is anybody's guess, but it's still not a bad recommendation. Just one thought.
I don't have much issue here with the bugs. The only thing that I've seen in we have mosquitoes and black flies, like you said, but mosquitoes, we're so used to them now that we probably eat a couple every day and we're still here, so they won't kill us. Last summer, the only thing I saw that was really bad, maybe for the garden or whatever, was those little tiny like cucumber beetles or whatever you call them. Those were all over my zucchini plants, but I just got there. Whenever I would see one, I would just squeeze them between my fingers, and you have to go every day, make sure you get them all. And after a while, it was the plants were growing well, and it just stopped coming. So I don't know. Beside that, we get the black flies inside the house often, especially with kids. They open the door, they leave the door open, they go in, they go out, they go in, they go out, they have friends over and whatever. But the only thing I hate about them is when they come in the bedroom. You're trying to sleep and then you get awakened in the middle of the night by a little buzz coming in your face. That does it for me. Usually when that happens, I wake up angry and try to find a way to get rid of them. But besides that, nothing major really.
Lucky.
You're lucky.
Well, we're used to them by now, so
the mosquitoes and the black flies up here can get really thick.
yeah.
And I know on our last property we cleared out a bunch of area and we were off the beaten track enough that there weren't really any foxes or anything that kind of came across we weren't in their path. And so our chickens just flourished and they were able to keep a lot of it down as well. But I know my neighbors, they found it's like a mosquito vacuum, I think it was called. So it sucks all the mosquitoes down inside and traps them and kills them, and they kill buckets and buckets load.
Nice.
And so they were just, it was I don't know, a couple 100,000 different, female mosquitoes that couldn't breed anymore. So it just really cut down the population around here, and it helped out a lot.
That's
Got to
interesting.
find one of those.
I'm gonna get one this year.
Yeah.
Look into it a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I just cry, complain, jump up and down, wave my arms in the air, and run inside and hide. But
Do the mosquito dance, the bug dance.
Mhm.
the mosquitoes aren't too bad for us. We get those little no-see-ums, the little gnats
yes.
that fly into your eyes. So you're even if you're gardening or carrying something, and you get one in the eye, and you're like, it's just brutal. So those guys, and then there's the other ones that are about the same size, and they'll like get in through stuff and start biting you, and you can't see them. They're the worst. But we've gone to using bug nets a lot of the time when we're out gardening or
Mhm.
doing chores, that kind of thing. I still actually have some mosquito repellent from the military, which I think is like 30% DEET. So I'll put that on like my hat or my shirt or something like that. I'll try not to let it touch my skin because it'll like take paint off cars and that kind of stuff. But that stuff works pretty good too.
There is a trick, not so much mosquitoes, but with deer flies and horse flies. Some people do it when they're doing like field work, like biological work and that. You get something higher than your head. Because you know how they do that thing where they're round, like they're not even landing, but they're just round and
They're
round.
just,
around.
yeah.
If it's taller than you, they kind of go to the highest point and do it.
Okay.
And again, generalization, but blue usually attracts them.
Huh.
So when it's really
Yeah, I
bad
heard
for them, dark colors too, but they really come to blue.
Cool.
So what you're saying is I should get one of those kids' hat with the little springs and balls on the top that
and they'll go to that.
We're gonna have some funny videos this summer.
Exactly, yeah.
Get one of those caps with the little propeller on the top.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Get
Speaking
Mark
of
Simpson's
something like-
hair.
I know Remy brought it up that he had bugs that little cucumber bugs that came into his garden. Have you guys found anything that is more natural, not like DEET or something like that for your garden that would keep the bugs away? Because I'd heard like cayenne pepper could work. I don't know if you'd had any experience with that.
Marigolds are supposed to do some, but we also do a lot of I want to say it's citronella plants.
Mhm.
So we have them indoors and then we propagate them in the spring. So we have a whole bunch of potted containers and we'll plant them around. Also, we plant a lot of the lavender and I forget the other one. There's another one that we've planted a bunch of that's supposed to keep the bugs away too.
I know,
Yes, that's right.
not that it's something you can really control, but specific to the cucumber beetles, I was doing some research a month ago or so and found out that big brown bats, which are still fortunately fairly common, they actually eat a lot of them. Who knew?
Yeah.
It's not enough to eradicate them, but you can definitely I don't know, encouraging certain wildlife to move a little closer. Some of the birds and stuff too can definitely help.
We put out 3 bat houses that we're hoping some will use, but we heard it might take up to 2 to 3 years for them to actually find it and start using it.
It can take a while, and it basically has to do, and I'm generalizing here, this is the biology side of me coming out, but they live for a long time. For a little mammal, like you think of like a mouse, right? You know, a mouse would be lucky to make it to 3. And the little brown myotis, which is the one they used to call a little brown bat, they hibernate, but they can live to be like 50.
That's wild.
Yeah. So
Nice.
Really?
recruitment is pretty low. Let's put it that way. They only have usually one offspring at a time.
Huh.
And, high mortality when they're young. And then once they become adults, they kind of, so yeah, it can take a while for them to move in because there aren't that many
Right.
in the broader ecosystem.
I have had an issue a couple of years back with ants. I had ants all over my veggies. And I tried that trick that everybody's talking about, 50-50 between borax and white sugar. And you put water and kind of make a little paste with it. And applied that to my garden and didn't see any ants this year. So it must have worked.
It's interesting on the pest side of things too. What we found is when we started here, there was nothing. So we had tons of ants around, but really nothing else. We started doing the gardens, and then what we saw is just this massive influx of grasshoppers and other pests. But as the years have progressed, what we found is, we've planted more trees. The gardens have been here for a while. We put bird feeders out. We put other vegetation around. And what we found is over the years, the bird population has increased to kind of compensate for, I guess, the increase of pests. So now we have more good predators like the birds, the bats, and other stuff. And that population of pests has now started to decrease and starting to even out.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, actually. There's some fairly big scale studies that have been done in the forest industry, like logging and whatnot, where they look at some of the really common, and this is the dilemma, but also the good part of it. It doesn't always work right down to the micro scale, right? Because you're still going to have those pests. But the spruce budworm and the Cape May warbler, which is just one species of little songbird, their populations, the Cape May warbler populations tend to go up like dramatically in areas that have the budworm outbreaks. And I'm not getting all this, but basically having good populations of the birds actually translates into quite a bit of economic benefit for the forest industry. It's basically proven science, if you want to say that,
right,
that it does work. So
like nature compensates, and when the bugs break out, then like the predators increase.
mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Because I had heard diatomaceous earth, if you put that around, it'll kill a lot of bugs, but it also kills the good ones too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of it works, but we found, again, not completely foolproof, but we do like a garlic spray that it does work. It was mostly targeting like the cabbage white butterflies. And I did some digging into that too, and it has to do with like, basically they taste with their feet and whatnot. So when they taste the garlic, they go, "Oh, it's not the right plant." Their eyes are telling them it's the right plant because the way it reflects UV light and stuff, but it tastes wrong. So,
oh wow,
for the most part, they won't lay eggs on it. The downside to it is it does wash off with the rain, so you do have to reapply.
You apply all the time.
Yeah, but we did find, again, not foolproof, but it does work on the squash bugs a bit. Sort of the same. It must be. I haven't looked into the science on it, but we were noticing that we had them, or the cucumber beetles, I should say. We have them, but when we sprayed it, they kind of you just see them kind of come off, and they're like all around the plants, but they didn't actually want to be on them anymore.
Nice.
Again, not foolproof, but
I know out here, I know I've been lucky enough that for the most part, I haven't had to do full-time work. I've been able to focus on the homestead itself, especially this last year after I was recovering from my surgery. So, but not everybody has that. And so I was wondering what your advice would be to somebody and how you manage to work, say, full-time jobs if you have them, and still manage a homestead.
I think we're all
Work hard, work efficiently, work smart.
Yeah.
And don't stress about stuff not getting done.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's hard though.
I think it's worse in winter.
I
Days
find
are
that
shorter
there's
in
always
winter.
much to do, and there's just like there's never enough time to get all the projects done. And every time I think I started to get one done, I've come up with 6 other projects that go in, it'll improve on the project that I'm doing. Um, I mean, out here right now, I mean, I built a barn, but I'm building a house at the same time. And then I was trying to, level out the land and try and get everything ready for the animals and trying to build a wood shed and everything else for my firewood for the winter and cut and split wood. So it's just I couldn't imagine having all that and then still having a 9 to 5. I I I couldn't get enough. I couldn't get enough done.
We
I
thought we
definitely-
got a lot done this year, and then our list actually got longer for this coming season, which is crazy.
Yeah, that tends to happen. I think you never really get to the end of the list, but
No.
I mean, kind of everything that has been said so far is definitely things to keep in mind. But also, I don't want to say don't overwhelm yourself, but like you say, work smarter. Pick things that maybe don't take as much time or complement each other. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but if you can find things that work that way, it can sort of still get you to your end goal. I'm talking really vague here, but those are great things to have. Great, yeah. It's like for me, it's like squash. You get a ton of production, but you don't have a lot of work, relatively speaking, right? Compared to some things that you may have to do, which kind of frees you up to work on other things. Of course, it's going to change season to season, but
Yeah. I feel like there's less things to do in the winter because you don't have to worry about the garden and all that kind of stuff. But then again, the days are shorter. So by the time I get home, it's usually already dark. That's where I struggle the most because I mean, you get home, it's cold, you're tired, you just want to go inside, go take a bath, and then like go to bed or go on YouTube and watch some of you guys. But in the summer, I mean, there's so much more to do, but then again, you have more time during the day, and I just enjoy being outside so much in the summer that I don't really mind. I can stay out until 11 o'clock at night and be up at 6 a.m. in the next morning to go to work. Um, and I mean, I was playing softball on a competitive team last year. We were playing like 4 times a week, so I don't even know how I managed to do all of that. Like I said earlier, my girlfriend doesn't really get involved in the gardening part. She takes care of the kids, which is all good. She takes care of the inside of the house. When it comes to the outside, it's mostly me. So try to take every little tiny minute I have left and do something. Like I mean, I think it's all about managing, and I suck at managing. Like I can't make a plan and follow the plan, but I'll be able to see, okay, I have 10 minutes today. I can do this in 10 minutes. This project here takes 2 hours. I'll start Saturday morning. You know what I mean? Like there's always those little tiny things you can do in those little um, few minutes leftovers you have during the day. So that's what I try to do as much as possible. But I mean, like Chris said, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get done.
Yeah, for us, winter's hard because we can't do much. Lack of daylight and too much snow. So,
Yeah.
we can't even trying to cut down trees. We're missing 2-3 feet of stump or of a tree. So when we want to cut down trees here, we try and use everything as posts or structural in other stuff that we do. So losing anywhere from 2 to 4 feet of the tree that we need as posts it's just not feasible. And then I think with the extra daylight during spring, summer, it makes it easier to get tasks done. But again, we don't stress about not getting stuff done. We learned right at the start that not everything's going to get done when we need it to get done. So we try to accomplish some of the really important stuff, get as far as we can on it. As well, not everything will get done at the same time. So say we're out doing a fence line. putting in a new fence. If we go out and do, 4 posts in one night rather than trying to do the whole thing, well, week or two goes by, we've got a lot more done than we would have trying to cram it all into one time frame sort of thing. So we also use a lot of our vacation time too to do a lot of stuff. So especially during harvest time, with the veggies, the gardens, and the animals, our vacation time is now used up for doing all that kind of stuff.
No, I definitely would agree with that. It's talk to other people and they take their vacation time and they ask you what you did on your vacation, and it's like, well, I worked, but on a different job.
But it's a different kind of work, though. It's fun.
Oh,
You still relax.
Sometimes it's productive with a job.
For myself, it's made a huge difference working from home.
I had to ask too. Okay.
Yeah.
For the good, or
I was
for not so good.
Well, I was commuting without traffic, it would be a 45-minute commute to work. So there's an hour and a half right there of commute time each day. And then I get an hour for lunch. So instead of spending that hour at the office, I'm at home now. So it allows me to do that much more around the homestead during the day.
Yeah, that does make a big difference.
Now, what would you do, or what are you doing to streamline things? Like I've seen a couple of YouTube videos where they got the livestock doing work for them. So they'll pen the chickens into the garden so that they scratch up the garden and also help fertilize it, stuff like that. They'll use pigs to clear some of the forest. Do you guys do any of that, or?
I'd like to,
Nobody?
but I find that our chickens do that anyway on purpose, not where we want them to. So we haven't really. I think what we'd have to do is be more purposeful in doing that, especially for, say, the compost or the gardens or that kind of thing. We need to get some more chicken fence, some more electrical fence, some better fencing for pigs. Whereas right now, we never intended for our animals to work in that way for us. So our meat chickens stay in the meat chicken area, our laying birds stay over in their area, the pigs have theirs, the cows have theirs. We never thought at the start to actually use them to help us cultivate the land or improve the land in that way. The chickens, though, we allow them to free range, which actually helps put in more nutrients into the soil all over the place, helps control the pests as well. But I think we'd have to get really dedicated to having them till the garden, per se.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's there's a lot of opportunities, but putting it into practical application is not. Sometimes you get lucky and something will just work well, but it's sometimes harder than it sounds on paper. Like we use something, it's not directly animal related, but we're going to, because there's so much manure produced in the wintertime because we have the animals in the barn, and for at least part of the time, we're basically taking that and just making the composting manure pile right on the garden. And we're going to have to tarp it here shortly. We should have probably already. Case in point, we didn't quite get there, but then it's taking out that little bit of labor, right? Because we won't have to take it from the pile to the garden. It'll just be there, and all we have to do is spread it out. We do, again, try to let our chickens free range as much as possible, but the downside to that is your garden areas that you want to actually grow anything have to be fenced to keep them out of it. And we find the geese are the same way.
Mhm.
Geese are great at eating weeds. The chickens are great at eating weeds and insects. But once they figure out that the lettuce patch tastes better, they're going there first. And there's not,
Yeah.
short of locking them up or locking them out, there's nothing you're doing to stop that. We do actually, this is a bigger thing, but we're starting to try to get to the point with the sheep and the grazing that we basically put them out and follow them with something else as a parasite control, because they're fairly susceptible to internal worms. There's a lot of fine tuning to that, but that's one of the reasons, actually, not the only one, but with having the horses, they can basically go in and sort of clean up those smaller pastures when the sheep come out, and they don't get the parasites, so they basically become like a terminal. They eat it and it's terminal. So that reduces your load of parasites on that pasture. But again, that takes time to get the finer details in that, and it never works perfect. Like using that example, you can put the horses in to follow the sheep, but you still got to have somewhere else that the horses can go, because they will eat more than what that capacity has. It's like the chickens, right? They'll weed and eat the stuff out of your garden, but you still got to have somewhere else, or they can go at certain times of the year. So it becomes a yearly, seasonal thing too. It gets rather complicated.
I hadn't thought of that. I know we're trying to use our goats to clear out some of the brush and the underbrush, and I was hoping to build hoop houses over top of raised garden beds for Angie, and so I could throw one or two chickens in there, and have them scratch up the ground and everything, and get everything ready. But on a large scale, I don't know how you'd make that work out so well.
Well,
So
that's one thing
I
we've
can
been
see
doing
that.
with our rabbits now, because it's sort of the same thing. We made the hutches so that they're portable, and in the summertime we can move them to where it's shady because that's beneficial to them. But in the wintertime, we're just put them right in the garden so that everything falls through. And then the chickens and the geese technically right now have access to that. So they're breaking it up even more. And then we actually did a little trial of that last year, and it made really nice soil directly under the rabbit hutch. So we're doing it on a little bigger scale, but it takes a bit of planning, right? Because you couldn't take just a normal, wire rabbit cage and plunk them out there. You've got to kind of come up with a design that'll keep them protected and still allow everything to follow where you want it and still be mobile. So it always gets more complicated, but if you can get it to work, I think that's the hard part, right? Because there's always a temptation to try to tweak it before you know if it's working or not. Because it's like, oh, I don't know if this is working, or maybe we could do this better. And then that can get expensive and time consuming trying to make all those little tweaks. So it's a tough thing, because you just have to pick a direction and go with it and hope it works out. And in a bigger yearly cycle, then kind of reassess and go, did that really work? Do we want to upscale it? Do we want to, I don't know, getting kind of vague again, but
No, I
There's
agree.
a lot
I
of purposeful
constantly
work
find
too.
I constantly find myself pulling like an old farmer's technique, and I'm out here banging on something with a hammer, trying to reshape some metal so that I can, make some new design that I've got in my head, just so I can make something work in a particular way, so that
Mhm.
it will benefit another section of the build or something that I'm doing. I don't know. Maybe
well,
it's
and
just
a
me.
nice
I'm always
the nice thing with that too is, like you said, Darren, you want to be purposeful, but that's where the experiment can work really well. Because like what you said about the raised beds, to scale it up, right? To take all your chickens and put them in a garden space right from day one and have them do that work. That's, you're potentially investing a lot in fencing and whatnot to
Yeah.
keep them there to do that. But to take a couple and see how you like it, and then try to figure out scaling it up after that. Sometimes there's a lot of benefit there, right? Kind of spend a little bit of time with a smaller experiment, get the proof of concept, and then go, okay, that actually didn't work too bad. Let's scale that up. Like we're doing that with sweet potatoes this year. This is the plan, which is a different direction. But we've grown them in totes. Like buckets kind of thing. We've grown them in the ground, and we've grown them in it's still container gardening, but those big blue barrels type thing. And of everything, the best seems to be for where we are the blue barrels, because they keep better moisture. They're big enough that they don't dry out super quick. You can put quite a bit of soil in them, which gives quite a bit of depth, so you can give it exactly what the soil composition they want without, being hard packed and everything. But you can still manage it. It's not so big that you can't deal with it. But it's exactly that proof of concept. Would we have gone and set up like 50 barrels to grow sweet potatoes off the bat? No, because that's a lot of money and time and effort. And if it doesn't work, what are you going to do? I guess you'd find something else to grow in them. But if you've done it with 1 or 2 barrels and gone, yeah, actually we noticed that didn't work too bad, then it's kind of like, well, maybe we go in that direction. And that's probably where you're always changing direction a little bit with things throughout life. You kind of figure out one thing really well, then move on to another component and figure out where to go with that. And then, yeah, that also goes back to the making your workload easier too, because once you get something figured out well, sometimes it runs itself.
Yeah.
Kind of generically saying that, because you've always got to do some work, but
Where I think for us, trying to use the animals to help our workload would actually increase our workload, because right now we don't have, say, a chicken tractor or something like that where we can move the chickens around and they have a protective hutch. They're in their chicken coop. It's not mobile. We can't move it around. So if we want to take those chickens over to the garden and make sure they're digging up a specific area of the garden, now we got to carry each individual chicken, or, grab 2 chickens at a time and take them over, try and make sure they stay in that fence where when they're out, they're used to free ranging. So they might jump out of that. So it becomes a lot more work for us to try and make the animals do stuff where we want them to do stuff.
Yeah. And like Stephanie's saying on the chat there, for me, my main focus is going to be rabbits from now on, at least on my property, because that's pretty much all I'm allowed to keep. But there's talks with my buddy Serge to go on his property and build a barn. I've said it a couple of times already. So if we get that done, I'm guessing he wants to expand on his property right there. So I'm guessing we're probably going to use the animals, to till the land and like clean all the crappy stuff, I guess. So far, I mean, I have a couple of chickens here, but I can't really let them go free range because, neighbors complain. So it's a little bit
Can
tougher.
you keep quail out at your place?
I don't think I can. I would have to check, but the way the bylaws are made, it's basically, well, they're what's the term that we're using now? I don't need to get the papers in front of me, but the way they're saying is almost like you can't have anything that's not considered a pet.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Wow,
leaves place to interpretation, but
yeah, there's a lot of municipalities that have I don't know, it's not quite what it used to be. It's exactly that. It's dogs and cats and a few other things,
but I mean, I have a video of my daughter that goes around with her chicken taking a walk on the side of the road. So for me,
you just have to put a harness on them all.
Yeah, that's it.
Star.
But I mean, for me, a chicken it's a layer. As long as it's a chicken layer, it can be considered as a pet. Because, like I said, my daughter brings the chicken around. She brings her sliding and takes her for a walk in the garden, and nobody's going to convince my daughter that it's not a pet.
that's something, because we were talking about this recently, because we've had chickens in the house before, not just chicks. And I think you could pick any farm animal. You can pick pretty much any animal, and in the right circumstances, that catch-all phrase of pet, like companionship and that sort of stuff, pretty much any animal can provide that. but there's these pre-existing notions of, well, a pet is a dog and a cat, or right, and people wouldn't even think that a chicken could do the same thing.
I think the term they were using is familiar pet or familiar animal or something like that. I mean, it was all written in French. It says animaux familiers, so that's what it means, familiar animals. So it leaves a lot of place to interpretation.
Yeah, because anything can be a family pet. Like if you got your chickens, those little vests with the arms on it,
I have one.
that'd be more.
I have one.
Oh.
But basically, they told me I was allowed to have dogs, cats, and they said I was allowed to have rabbits, and I have it on an email, so they're not going to bother me for rabbits. I mean,
Nice.
there's nothing they can do about that. But I mean, worst comes to worst, I'll keep a couple of chickens here. They told me I was allowed 4, and like they said, if you have 6 or 7, we're not going to bug you for just a couple of extra chickens. So I mean, if I have like 70, 19, 20, I'm not going to talk too much about it and keep them there.
What chicken? We don't know anything, Lenny.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, they're in my garage anyway, so they're not really allowed to go in there. So
I'm pretty sure we have a limit on our animals too, and I think like one of them is 6 large animals. But I think there's something in the bylaw that states like sort of continuous or something. So it's like we kind of interpreted it that, if we want 6 Highland cows, that's great. And if they give a baby and now we have 7, 8, 9, that's fine too, because they're not going to be here permanently. They're going to be food. So it's like,
yeah. And sometimes the bigger property you have, the more animals you're allowed to have too.
I know where we are because we looked into this. There's the municipal bylaws, but then there is some provincial regulations on this, and I won't go into it too much. But sometimes
I won't incriminate myself.
Well, but it's interesting because the municipal stuff. I'm going to say it this way. It is very open-ended, kind of up to interpretation, because I don't know. I mean, every municipality does their own thing, right? And they do look at what when they draft bylaws, they look at what other municipalities are doing, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and I don't say this in a disrespectful way, but that the people who are drafting this really understand what they're drafting at the municipal level. When you go up to the provincial or the federal, it's a little different. I think they know more about the laws they're dealing with. I'm just going to leave that as a generic statement. But some of the regulations around livestock in Ontario, it all goes back to what they call animal units, and I won't go into too much about it, but each kind of animal has like a number associated with it for an animal unit. So like a cow would be like a cow-calf pair, and I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, they do look at it like that calf is like up to the year mark, so not a heifer type thing or a steer. But they consider that a unit, and it all has to do with the amount of basically manure, the waste that they produce. At least that is based in a little bit of science, because they're looking at it like, okay, if you have X amount of area, you've got 4 acres, you could put 10 cows on it, but what is the nutrient load going to be? Or you could put 30 cows on there. You physically stand them there, but what's the repercussion, sort of thing. And what was interesting is we actually cited that because the bylaw before we moved had to do with when things were offensive. But they just said, no, we're interpreting it this way. It didn't really matter about this provincial stuff. So could have got interesting if we wanted to keep pursuing it, but you kind of get to a point where it's like the resources and time you're spending chasing that for where it's likely going to end up, is it worth it?
Right.
Yeah. You really
Better
have
off
to manage how much time you're putting into stuff, right?
Choose your battle.
Now,
Yeah.
After saying all this, it looks like I might have to get rabbits now, so I'm gonna be hitting you guys up for ideas on rabbit hutches and stuff like that. What does rabbit taste like?
Chicken.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I always say it's got a very chicken-like flavor, but it's firmer. Like if I mean, a lot of us are eating homegrown chicken, but like it's definitely firmer than store-bought chicken.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a nice thing, depending on how you cook it.
Yeah. Just
did-
just watch the live stream I had last week with Jim and Chris, and you'll get pretty much the whole story about rabbits. I think it was pretty complete. I know I learned a lot. I asked a lot of questions, and it was awesome.
So we started doing ours whole and then just freezing the whole rabbit, and we'll stuff them like a turkey. Exact same seasonings, everything, and you wouldn't know it's not a turkey or a chicken. It's
We do a lot where we either debone it, which is a little bit more work, but if you want to grind it, and you can basically, this is where being firmer we find is actually nice, because ground chicken, even our Chanticleers, we find if you grind them, it goes kind of mushy. It still tastes fine, but the rabbit keeps like a better consistency. So when you cook it up, it's not like ground beef, but it's got that kind of consistency to it. So we do like that, but we've been, just from a simplicity sake, we've been cooking them whole, and you definitely want to keep them moist. However you're doing it, you don't want them to dry out, because then they go quite tough. But and we've basically just been doing like pulled rabbit, where you just take all the meat off, and then you can freeze it. You can either eat it right away, or you can freeze it into portions sizes for making stir fries or something later.
Yeah.
Or you can put it in a canning recipe, or like you kind of do whatever you want with it at that point.
And a little shout out to Chris and Steph for their rabbit soup recipe. Check out that YouTube video. That is really good. We did that this year. And we also just canned plain rabbit. So just stick the rabbit in a jar, can it like you would normally. And we use that similar to chicken. So making rabbit pasta salad and that kind of stuff. So
that's actually
send me
something
that
we've not
link.
tried is canning.
Okay, you'll find it. Okay, yeah, we'll put that in the.
Which link is it?
I don't.
But what's it for? Like
For the rabbit soup, their recipe.
Okay. And then
Okay.
I'll put the link for
And
Remy.
another one I'll put down in another link I'll leave down in there. My neighbors did that. They did a review on that mosquito catcher, that vacuum.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'll leave that down there, and you can check that out too.
That'll be interesting.
So yeah, that's it worked great. They came over with it was just stock full, and it was just thick, like it compacted all of them. So it was like a little bucket on a little bowl, and it was just like 2-3 inches thick, and it was just compacted of mosquitoes. And they would just empty it out a couple times every other day or something. I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would just throw everything in the fire, just burn it.
Yeah, exactly. So satisfying. But those fly bags work really well too.
We had them actually because for a while we were having pretty good issues with flies when we first moved in. I should have mentioned that before. We do find that's where chickens in the barn are nice, because they go in and they work everything. They're annoying because when I say everything, they get into everything, but they're really good at going into the stalls and finding all those fly larvae and stuff. So it really does reduce it. But we did the bags too. The only thing we found was with the horses being taller, you had to be careful where you put them, because they get curious, and the cows too. They get curious, and then it's on the floor, broken.
Yeah.
But
All right. Yeah, that's pretty much what I had for tonight. If you guys have anything in mind that you wanted to talk about tonight, because I know Remy had another live he has to get to.
Yeah, I'm still good to go. It's just
You're still good to go?
2 hours. It's just in 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
oh, there we go.
I know one thing that we had. I know Angie was talking to me about earlier, because we're building everything right now from scratch, and I'm like, developing the land and the layout and everything like that, is there any suggestions you'd shoot out to, us or anybody else that was in this situation? Like, what would you build, or what would you focus on?
Hmm.
We were trying to go through that a little while ago because when we moved here, we actually were renting half the house. So we had basically this side of the property for ourselves, and we kind of, got the chickens and slowly started planting stuff. And then as we knew we were going to buy the entire property and the house, then we kind of started moving on to the other side. But from there, what we found is, again, we've got the chickens over there, the rabbits over here, the gardens over there, the cows are over there, the meat chickens are over there, the goats are going to be over there. Whereas if we had started from scratch, we probably, if we could afford it at the time, probably built like a dedicated barn or a dedicated spot where we wanted all the animals to eventually be. So even if we didn't build, say, a barn, we would build kind of one fenced in area that led to other fenced in areas. And in that fenced in area, then maybe we would put smaller shelters for the animals until we could eventually build a barn. But having something where everything connects to one spot, where we could store the feed, we'd have the water coming to. If we needed to work on the animals, then all the meds would be in the one place. All the tools would be in the one place. Whereas right now we're all over the place.
I'd probably go a little further too with that, because I think I do agree in an absolute ideal situation, it would be perfect to have it all together. But if you couldn't do that, because sometimes, one big structure might not be in the cards, for example, the next best thing is to still take that same principle where you're all close. So it may not be physically in the same space, but you kind of, it's almost like, I think we call it like the old farmyard, right? Where everything's kind of in very close proximity to one another. And this one thing we find with keeping, for example, the chickens, because we have so many different breeding groups of them, having them in separate, smaller buildings, but they're all close, like they're all within reasonable walking distance to one another, is nice because it keeps them separate. But it also means that each one of those buildings, like you could do it modularly. I'm not gonna say that right. You could do it one little building at a time. It becomes like the little village, right? The chicken village, or the, insert animal or whatever. It's just another way to look at it, because if you didn't have the funds or the resources to do the one big, don't get me wrong, there are days when it would be nice to have a mega barn that you could still have all your chicken runs and this, whatever, and it's all together. I think that really would be the ultimate. But
for us, the key to that would be just the heat, so all the animals could keep each other warm, sort of thing.
Yeah, that definitely factors in. That's where we're terrible, because our chickens just they don't need the heat at all.
That's just it. The rabbits and the chickens don't. The cows don't. But eventually we'd like to get, some sort of heritage pig, so we don't have to keep buying feeder pigs every year. And then the goats, I'm sure they could withstand, some colder weather, but not the really cold weather. So again, having them in close proximity or be able to heat each other, and also try and help the water from freezing, that would be a bonus.
Well, that's a big one. As your animals get bigger, the water consumption goes up. Like cows and horses and stuff drink a lot more than a chicken.
Yeah.
So you do need that centralized for that exact reason. Whether you've got a yard hydrant or whatever it is that you have for your water source, you don't want to have a million of them around the yard in the winter.
I don't really have an answer to your question, Mike, because I purchased a house. it was already here. I purchased one little building, and as soon as I did, the village came at me. So, we're talking about building a barn. So I'm gonna take everything in that you guys are talking about, and talk with my buddy when we decide to plan and go ahead with what we want to do. I know we're gonna build a barn. The only thing that there won't be any electricity there, not yet anyway. And it has this big water pond in the back. So this is probably going to be the main water. Uh, yeah, the only way we can get water there. It has this big pump generator and everything, so we can bring it up the hill. And he's been watering the garden with that in the last couple of years, so it's
Nice.
very very easy to do. Now about the animals, I don't know how we're gonna set everything up because we don't want to have it too close to the water so it doesn't, we don't want the water to go too high and lose everything, but we don't want to have everything too far so that we can't have access to it. And right now, the main issue is going to be for the winters because it's not like it's only 5 minutes from my place. Buddy doesn't live there. My buddy doesn't live there. So in the winter, we have to find a way to go plow the driveway so I can go feed the animals at night when I get back from work. So that's gonna be. You keep saying that it's gonna have a tractor there, but I've never driven a tractor before, so it's gonna be. I'm gonna have to learn, and I'm gonna have to be ready to go and do that whenever we have a storm because you know animals need to eat and they need to get the water. So I'm gonna be
Well, don't
learning.
be too intimidated. I had never driven anything bigger than like an old Ford, was it 9N or something, which is not a very big tractor. And I just bought a backhoe, so you can figure it out.
My dad has this big tractor when we butchered the pigs a couple of years back, and my brother just started up to try to lift the pig a little higher, and then we didn't even know how to close the tractor up. So it was just okay. I'm gonna call dad, tell him to come over, shut down the tractor because we don't want to run in the river ahead. So that's how I suck with machinery.
That's okay. I'm no better.
Good to know. Good to know.
That's
I'd
the
say
one thing
for
I've learned since I moved out here. Sorry, go ahead, Darren.
go.
I I've known a little bit about everything, and so like when I moved out here, I just kind of quickly picked up. There's nobody here to ask, really. You just got to jump in and figure it out. And so, like, I mean, from a small engine repair class in high school, 20 some years ago, I'm out here now, rebuilding my generator half the time if it gets snow sucked into the carburetor, and possibly I think it went all the way to the valves that day, or trying to figure out why the backhoe won't start. So now I'm a diesel mechanic all of a sudden and trying to figure that out. Or like when the on the backhoe the rear differential lock was not working because it's frozen. So I went out and figured, followed the linkage, and I'm like, okay, I can't really break that. So then I took a 3-pound sledge to it and started moving it around. You just figure it out.
Yeah, definitely on a farm or a homestead, not you're gonna start learning pretty quick how to fix stuff and get stuff done.
Yeah, you kind of have to. It comes with a job, like they say.
Mhm.
Now, one of the good things that I found out here is we got the artesian well. I don't know if I've talked about it before, but I've got plans on plans now. So I'm going to run the artesian well downhill past the house, and with the backhoe, I'm going to build a level plateau, and that's where I'm going to put the goats and the chickens. So I'll put the chicken coop and then the goat pen, and I'll have a covered breezeway in between, and that's where I'm going to put the overflow of the water. I'm going to run it right in between there, and because it's constantly flowing, I'm hoping I'll never have to. It won't freeze in the winter. I'll never have to water the animals again, and then it'll also be a straight shot down, like from the road down my driveway. I could back the truck right up to whatever structure I put right next to it to house all the feed and everything. So going along with what you're saying, trying to keep everything as centralized as possible, and then creating their pens from that, just so it's really accessible all season long, like all 4 seasons.
Depending on the drop of the water too and the run you have, I'd suggest even seeing if you can fit a water wheel in there for off-grid power.
I don't know if it'll be enough because I think I'm only getting maybe a few liters an hour, so it's probably not of enough pressure. But I'm willing to give it a shot. I wish, like you were saying, I wish it was tons of pressure. Then I'd have a few of them in there. But yeah.
Is there not ones that you can use the drop? I'm not an expert on this, but I thought there was generators where you probably still need a certain flow rate, but I thought the drop could also, like, you basically, if you can impound it enough to have enough of a drop, I could totally making things up, but I'm sure there is something.
There's some, as long as you have some sort of flow, like turbines where you have a small flow, but it'll basically increase the rotation. The other option is like with a bigger water wheel. You know, you don't have to have a huge amount of water as long as that wheel's turning, and then you basically set up the gears to be able to spin faster. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So instead of just a trickle charge all day, you'd like re-gear it so it pumps out even more power.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept.
Stephanie has a good point there too. Keep enough space for snow because you're going to get a lot of snow.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing right now with you doing a lot of the building. You're seeing where that is, right?
Yeah.
But I will say if
their basement.
But anybody who's property, sort of when there's not snow on the ground, you almost can't really plan until you sort of see what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because you can look at an area and go, oh, I've got all sorts of space to turn around trailers and this, that, and whatever, and then you get to 4 feet of snow and it's like, I don't have any space anymore.
We planned our greenhouse too to be right beside the driveway, so that when I'm blowing snow, I can go right by the front of the greenhouse and clear off the snow from it. That's like
a good idea.
Come down off the roof. So
it'd be easier
That's
to
a really
access.
good idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, okay, here's where I'm going to snow plow. We know we want to keep that open, so let's stick it right here. So as I'm doing the driveway, I just continue on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do a lot more things now, Mike.
But it's the same with animals, right? So we stuck our rabbits beside the greenhouse. So I clear the greenhouse, I clear the rabbit area, I can continue on and go past the chickens, make sure they're open. So I try and keep everything so it's kind of in line and where I want to clear for the snow.
Mm-hmm. I kind of kept an area open for that. So when you're coming down the drive and you pass the barn, there's a huge open area on the left, and that's where I was going to plow all my snow to. It didn't work out this year because I ended up with a pile or 3 of lumber in the way, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And so I'm a little off center from where I had planned on putting it. But I'm hoping it'll work out in the future. I don't know.
But even that kind of stuff, it helps plan and helps figure out, like, you're like, oh, okay, well, this didn't work out the way I wanted to, but now I realize that something else might work better. So it's always a learning game.
And that goes back to the job list of trying to get things done.
Yeah.
Like in the future, not to stockpile the lumber there.
Yeah.
Have the lumber moved. You can have it there in the summer, but have it moved by such and such a time in an ideal world.
I've actually in my head the tires place in a different spot on the property, that for future reference, I'm putting lumber here. So,
Marilyn on the chat had a good point too. Try to find a place, where the animals get shades in the summer and a lot of sun in the winter, if you can. I mean, it's not always doable, but you got to give them some shades in the summer for sure.
That's something we were actually talking about this the other day with the rabbits, because at least where we all live, it's exactly that. In the summer, you want them in shade. Some people call it like deep shade, where the rabbit's got shade from its hutch or its building or whatever. But it's even better if you've got like a tree shading it or something, because it keeps that temperature more stable, which is what they like. But then in the wintertime, it's like the exact opposite. Having them access to, you don't want them full out in the sun all day. Like, they still need to be able to get out of it, but they love lying out in the sun when it's minus 20. So it's like a reverse of what most of what you read is all about rabbits and heat. And I think it's because in a lot of parts of the US, for example, where it's more common than it is here to have meat rabbits, or more people have them, that's what they have to deal with. But we have the opposite, right? Yeah. So, which they like in some ways, but it kind of reverses the thought process, because in the winter, face them south towards the sun. They love it.
Yeah, we've started now this year moving our rabbits. So winter they come out beside the greenhouse. They're facing the sun. I can keep them clear. And then in summer, they get moved over beside the chickens. And that way they're almost in shade all the time. Except when we put them in the new colony, then they were able to actually get some sun as well. But we still have a shelter over top of them.
Yeah, and that's a good in the chat too. That's a good one. Keep them around the hardwoods, because if you don't want to have to move them far, if you've got big maple or poplar or whatever, you're going to get that change that you want. They're going to be in the sun in the winter, and they're going to be in the shade in the in the summer.
Good point.
Yeah.
Depending on your situation and stuff, but yeah.
Might have to start planting trees.
It's funny. We started with, moving trees back, as well as when we got the cows, we had to make the fence line. We wanted the pasture, and it was almost like as we cut trees down, we actually started buying a lot of trees as well to replace those trees. And we kind of, we're pushing back into the forest, but also on our property now we're building more because we want the shade in certain spots, not on the garden. We also want the fruit trees instead of just pine trees. So,
well, that goes back into the discussion about the birds and the bats and all of that other stuff too, right? Because this is one thing this is the biologist in me, but with machinery, you can do a lot really quick. Like, if you have enough horsepower, a big enough bulldozer, you can go in an afternoon and level a forest. If it's big enough. Not really, but you can 100-acre forest on like that if you've got the machinery for it. But doing it the other way, exactly like what you're saying, Darren, kind of over the years, you eat away at this section of your property because you want pasture, but then over here you modify it and you start planting. Some of it might be fruit trees and things, and some of it might be shade trees or whatever. So you end up
hardwoods and a variety to keep everything as a variety and not just one.
Because your local, the animals and whatnot, I'm going to say birds, but that are around you, they will adapt with that way better than they will with the, clear it all and start from scratch, because you didn't level their habitat.
No, and that's the other thing is in my mind, you don't want to level everything, because there's birds like the woodpeckers that we have tons of, where we don't want to take out all the dead trees because they use those. So it's kind of, as we clear, it's also a selective clearing and making sure we still have the habitat that it is for, the birds that are already here.
Well, and then it goes directly into pests too, right? Because if you level the forest, create a giant row crop field, not that any of us are going to do that, but you do that, you've just created the perfect environment for certain pests to just proliferate, right? Because,
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you don't get the checks and balances, whereas you can alter a lot, and still keep that balance. I think that's something people forget about with homesteading, because it's the romantic side is, I'm going to grow my food and stuff, but the reality of it is the other stuff all matters, because it still affects your ability to do those things.
Oh, exactly. Like we have the section up front where, we're not touching that. That stays as natural as possible due to the amount of orchids and other stuff that's up there. We've got dead birch, dead pines, for, like I said, the woodpecker habitat. We've got grouse that feed off I think it's the birch and the alders. The wild orchids that come up, so we don't want to disturb those at all. So again, it's being selective, taking our time, and making sure we replace stuff. And then the one thing we've done too is, because we have a lot of pine here, we're also planting a lot of Korean pine, which is not the same as the spruce and fir that were taken down, but it's similar. But then the Korean pine also gives us the pine nuts for the pesto sauce. Not for 15 years, but
It's a long term.
yeah.
I can see your point with that.
But again,
'cause
it's
I
one of
know
those long-term projects that, you continue to try and improve what you have. So, and for us, probably the same as you guys, we try and improve it as natural as possible, instead of paving over everything and making improvements.
Well, that's the thing too that goes back to the animals doing some of the work for you, right? Because you can go overboard with that too, right? Like, not that, again, I don't think any of us would do this, but you want to clear some bush, get yourself some good electric fencing, and get 50 pigs. There'll be a lot of dead standing timber, but there won't be much else there at the end of that, right? But then it kind of goes back to like the nutrient management thing. Like, is that too much too quickly? You can really start picking things apart, and like when you look at the interconnectedness, like we're doing that with our pastures. We are selectively taking things out. Obviously, we have a lot of wild apple trees. We're leaving a lot of those and taking out some other competing things that maybe, if something's shading it out, the apple tree, we're probably going to take that out. But that's in one area. And then that also, we have an effect on the understory stuff, right? Because ideally we want grass, but we don't want to just go in and, you could take a bulldozer and just bloop, all gone and reseed it. And a lot of people do that, but that's expensive and you still lose an entire year. And whereas if you kind of slowly put animals on, let's say slowly, but put them on it over time, that will still improve to get to your end goal.
Yeah.
And you don't lose some of the other functions, because you will still have it, but it still gets more complicated because you may have the quote unquote weeds you're managing may be different in that environment, because, it might be something that the sheep don't eat or the cows don't eat, or whatever, insert animal here, whatever they don't like is going to be what's left. And that's the stuff you may have to manage, but it's different than a garden. It can all get really complicated.
And doing it slowly like that, you're not disrupting the habitat and ecosystem as quickly and as fast. You're giving it time to adjust.
That's one thing I to go off on a tangent on. I'm going to use birds as an example, but it can be anything. I mean, you think of migratory birds, they leave and then they come back. Well, if they leave for the winter and they come back and somebody's bulldozed the forest, how likely do you really think that bird is to survive? Because you've just taken it's like you living here in the summer and going to Florida in the winter, and you come back and my house is gone. Right? Like, it is the equivalent of that. Whereas if it's like, they cut a couple trees down, that probably doesn't affect it as much.
I think that's one of the reasons why we are missing a lot of deers around here. They've been cutting woods like crazy all over the province. And I mean, just like you said, you're a deer, you're used to run, and you know that there's a like a deep wood right there that you can go and escape from the coyote that's chasing you. And you get there, and suddenly you're in the middle of an opening, and you're like going down in 5 feet of snow. Chances are, whatever is chasing you is going to catch you.
There's a term for that. They call it death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah,
Is
makes sense.
incrementally each little thing on its own isn't a big deal, but when you the multiplier effect of that, it becomes huge.
Yeah.
And although I would say, like, as homesteaders, we're still kind of a minority, relatively speaking. We're not as many as we maybe should be, but I think it's keeping that in the back of our minds that we still have an impact.
Yeah.
And you know, if you own 30 acres or 10 acres or 2 acres, even, like, or what, pick a size, it doesn't matter. You own more than an apartment somewhere in the city, you still have an impact. Your impact might be different, but yeah. And if everybody goes the same way, i.e., like you say, if everybody cuts everything down to grow corn because of the economic incentive for it, what does that leave you with?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, I mean, if you're the kind of person that feeds birds, if you keep feeding birds for years and suddenly you just stop, I mean, chances are you're killing a lot of birds. There's a guy not too far from here that he's feeding the deers, and that's one of the things my brother hates the most, because he keeps saying eventually that guy, I mean, they're gonna either die or move or sell the place, and whoever takes over might not continue. When those deers are used to go there every winter to get hay and apples and carrots, and suddenly all that's going to be gone for them. So the animals are good at adapting, but they're not that good. It takes a while for them to adapt to their new environment. So we have to give them time. And like Chris says, if we do a little bit at a time, it's not that bad. But if we go and do everything all at once, chances are, and I mean, I talk about those animals because I'm a hunter and I see the impact that it has on the animals. But it's pretty much the same thing with every little insect that we have on our garden or on our apple trees or whatever we have on our property.
Yeah, we try to do the same with, like, when we put out bird feed and that kind of stuff. We don't keep it filled all the time. We throw it out every now and then to enjoy the birds that do show up. We put the hummingbird feeder out every so often, but we don't stress if it runs out, because they were here anyway before the bird feeder and the hummingbird feeder. So I know they're in the area anyway. So we also work at trying instead just to plant more flowers and more stuff for them to feed on. So we do more Menard for the hummingbird. We leave a bunch of the sunflowers standing through the winter for the birds to feed on. So just stuff like that, more natural stuff for them instead of continuous feeding them.
Well, it's interesting too, because we obviously feed the birds, but it's weeds, like your garden, for example. If you have weeds that go to seed, and this is going back to, like, full circle to talking about rules and regulations and stuff, but the Migratory Bird Convention Act is from like 1924. It's like one of the oldest pieces of environmental legislation, like, anywhere in the world. Even back then, people realized birds a lot of birds, not all of them, do two amazing things. They eat bugs that we don't like and eat our crops, and they eat weed seeds that we don't like and outcompete our crops. And, like, we see it all the time in fall through kind of early spring, when things like American goldfinches, common redpolls, those are two big ones. That the redpolls don't breed here; they come for the winter, and the goldfinches, it just depends on the year. They do breed here, but they come to the feeder and then they go over into the garden and they'll eat in the garden for the afternoon. So that's part of it too, right? Because the feeder gets them there, which is kind of whatever. But then if there's other things for them to stay for, then you get more benefit out of them.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. Yeah,
looking at it, but they benefit and we benefit. So
yeah.
win-win for everybody.
And that's what I like about doing the different trees too. Our entire property was pine. Most of the entire area around here is pine. So if we can now start doing, take one pine down, plant one apple tree. Take a pine down, plant a pear tree. Take a pine down, plant a burn nut tree. It's like, you start changing and adjusting. You still have the natural habitat, but then you're bringing in new species as well.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a good like in an ideal world, a good situation. If at least you're always compensating kind of a 1-to-1, not necessarily the same thing, but you're not losing.
Exactly. We're trying, but when we cleared the one field for the cows, we got down into the red. So this year we're going to try and get some more trees out there. We left a few out in the one field for them, but this year we're going to try and get some trees out there for them, get some more replanted.
That's one thing though, and this is going to go in with, not to keep taking over the conversation, but this is going to go with my hatred for lawns.
I hate grass now.
Well,
I used to cut grass on a golf course as a living, and I loved it. I loved doing it. I loved making the stripes. I loved making it nice and even. Now it's like I hate grass. It's going to be garden. It's going to be rhubarb. It's going to be thyme. It's going to be rosemary. It's,
But grass is still amazing, but not long grass, right? Because it's like with your cows, you want lots of grass.
Yes.
Ideally.
Yes.
But that's another thing too, is sometimes you can change, and you've touched on it, right? Because like you said, you're taking one tree type and replacing it with a different one. But you can sometimes also change the habitat type too, right? Like going from because this is our property, it was at one point 100% cleared at one point in history. I've seen historical photos of the area, and unless it was the top of a high rock knob, it was cleared. It was all tilled or plowed, which is crazy. It's obviously regenerated over time, and you get what a lot of people call like scrubland. That still has values. Like a lot of your berry producing trees and stuff and bushes are in those environments. Not all of them, but at the same time, converting some of it to a more of a, I'm going to say, quote unquote, grassland, or what most people would think of like pasture land. That's not necessarily a negative either. It's just different. And I think that's something
that's what we have here too.
I think
this
you're
used
right
to be
about
all cow
grass
pasture out
versus
here.
pasture. There's.
All right. Well, I know we were going on quite a bit longer than we had originally intended, so I thought we'd just wrap it up a little bit here. Thank you for everybody for showing up, and thank you to everybody for watching.
It's a blast, like always.
Yeah, love it.
Lots of good conversation.
For everybody out there, oh, it was great. I know I've taken away a lot of things. I've learned quite a few things that I want to do. I know without even realizing it, I've been paying attention to the natural order of the land out here because there's a beaver pond out behind our property. And so I was not really thinking about it, but I was trying to direct the overflow from the well to continue down that way because I'm sure it's an underground feed for that. So, yeah, it's opened my eyes to a few things that I didn't realize before.
That's good.
That's good.
All right.
It's always great picking up new stuff.
Yep.
Well, thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for everybody showing up. I think we'll close it up. So,
all right.
Until next time,
Hey, guys.
Everybody have a good night.
All right.
Yep. Take care.
Take care, all.